Yes, we are live. You can start.
All right. Good evening and welcome to one of our Friday sessions with Anajuri. For those of you joining for the first time today, Anajuri is a non-profit platform to engage and promote various kinds of initiatives that are striving for social change, leadership building, and entrepreneurship. During the course of the last few months, we have been engaging through virtual media and inviting speakers engaged in various fields to create a network amongst people working in the Northeast. So, we have today an esteemed speaker, a professor at Cotton University, uh, Mr. Narayan Sharma, and who will walk us through the concept of conservation biology, which is pretty new even for me. And he will talk about it, uh, even about conservation science. So when I hear the word conservation, we usually imagine saving the endangered species, but there is way more than that. There is way more aspects of it. So we'll talk about that, and please welcome uh, Narayan Sharma. Sir, over to you.
Okay, first of all, thank you, Team Energy, for giving me this opportunity to interact with you all. Uh, so when Priyanshu called me in he asked me to give a talk. I asked him which topic should I talk, and he tentatively gave me the topic called animal welfare. So frankly, I didn't have that much of experience in talking about animal welfare, but I thought okay, I'll talk about it. But when I was going through this animal welfare literature, I thought I found that it's not you cannot just start animal welfare. But I think if someone is interested in animal welfare, they should also know something about conservation science and conservation biology. Then I rather starting from the animal welfare. So what I wanted to start is to start the topic called the conservation biology. So how this new field, right now it's not very new now. I think it's almost 25 years old now. How it evolved and how it developed over a period of time, and how it was challenged by different new ideas and new thoughts. So, so there was a meeting in 1978 uh, in a place called Saint Diego Jews Wild Animal Park in 1978. So there were assemblies of very odd assortment
Sir,
of
excuse me.
yeah yeah
Uh, Sir, can you bring your mic a bit forward?
okay.
Uh,
Is it okay?
yes, sir.
Yeah. So there is this very odd assortment of people. Uh, there were veterinarian, zookeepers, academicians in the conservation at that time, the people who were working in the conservation. So in that meeting, uh, there was one biologist called Michael Sohn. He thought this is a very good opportunity to talk to this gathering or talk to the people who were assembled for that banquet. And he gave a very impromptu talk. And he actually talked about how the world is going through a crisis, how the world is seeing a lot of extinction of various species. And what he was emphasizing that the people who are working in say, conservation are not talking to, say, wildlife managers or wildlife managers who are doing um, who are protecting or who are managing the wildlife reserves are not very much interested in talking to them. conditions. So he proposed a new kind of discipline that integrates this seemingly at that time very contrasting viewpoints. So then, in following two years, 1980s, so he and Bruce Wilcox, they edited a volume called the Conservation Biology and Evolutionary and Ecological Perspective. So this is one of the very, very pioneering book and one of the classic book on conservation biology, which actually set the tone for what conservation biology is, how, what are the ways by which you can save this endangered species, what are the ways by which you can stop the declining populations. And then there is also a work of the Society of Conservation for Conservation Biology in 1985. And they started a new journal called Conservation Biology. So it's a very, very reputed journal right now in 1987. Having said all these things, so I want to tell you what Michael Soar think about what a conservation biology is. So he wrote a very, very influential paper in 1985 in a journal called Bioscience, very reputed journal, where he actually spell out what is conservation biology, where he said that this is a new discipline that addresses the dynamics and the problems of perturbed species, communities, and ecosystems. So Michael Soar compared the conservation biology with the cancer biology. So just because species are declining and there is a such kind of crisis discipline, just like a cancer biology, because cancer was and is still a very, very crisis situation. So we do not have that much of so just like the cancer, if someone gets cancer or gets affected by cancer, it is still not, people are not being able to pinpoint the medicines or pinpoint the causes, pinpoint why it happened and how to prevent it. So then it needs a range of different disciplines. For example, the cancer biology needs the help of epidemiology, virology, cell biology, molecular biology, immunology, oncology, metabiology, clinical practices, and the pharmacology. So it's cancer can be treated or cancer can be managed by using the ideas and the knowledge of all these things. So similarly, conservation biology is also a discipline, also a science that borrow heavily from genetics, natural resource field, social sciences, eco-philosophy, environmental monitoring, etc. etc. So, so the conservation biology is, as I said, is heavily dependent on these various fields and borrowed the knowledge from them and then work for the conservation of the endangered species of plants and animals. So Soul then gives around 4 functional postulates. So these postulates are like the rules for excellence. So what are the rules that you need to follow if you want to say conserve or preserve a particular species, ecosystems, or the population? So the first functional postulates says that many of the species that constitute natural communities are the product of co-evolutionary processes. So he gave a lot of emphasis on the co-evolution. That means if a species is evolving, then there is one more species which is very much dependent on the other species, and they are evolving together. So this is the whole co-evolutionary process. Okay. Then many, if not all, ecological processes have threshold below and above which they become discontinuous, chaotic, and sustainable. So there are certain optimality in all the systems. So if you disturb this system, then the entire system becomes discontinuous chaotic ecosystem. So the conservation biology, conservation should focus on maintaining this so-called equilibrium in ecological processes. And the genetic and the demographic processes have threshold below which non-adaptive random forces begin to prevail over adaptive deterministic process within population. For example, if the population comes below a certain threshold level, so for example, if the population of, say, some species uh, uh, reduced to, say, 10 or 20 individuals, then it's extremely difficult to revive that population. Then what happens is just non-adaptive random processes will play a bigger role in eliminating that species. For example, if so all of you know about how difficult it is to revive the population of pygmy Nolgahood in Assam, because it's came to a very threshold level. It's much below the threshold level. So it's a humongous task to bring that species uh, to some sort of like a viable population where if you are not interfering with them, the population can say sustain. So, and the fourth is the nature reserves are inherently disequilibrial for large rare organisms. So large rare organisms are needed large reserve. When I'm talking about the reserves here, so it can be grassland, it can be forest, it can be say mountain ecosystem, it can be wetlands. So what Sol was saying that large rare species they need large reserves. Then Sol also postulates four normative things. So according to that, diversity of organism is good. So if there are more diverse animals, there are in an area, that is good. Ecological complexity is good. So complexity, when I'm saying that if there is a very simple kind of food chain, so A is B, B is C, okay. But if there are other, it's kind of not the chain rather than the way, but more complex ecological system, better it is. So evolution is good because this postulates was based on the fact that evolution creates or evolution gives rise to new set of species. So evolution is always good. And fourth is one of the very important postulates, normative postulates that Sol gave was biotic diversity has intrinsic value, regardless of its utilitarian value. So we will be talking about the intrinsic value throughout this talk, because when I'm saying intrinsic value, so it says that the value by itself. So if uh, it's not say defined by how what's its utility, rather than it's there uh, and its intrinsic value, because by being itself. So for example, if there is one ant, one individual of ant, it has an intrinsic value. So I uh, the biologist shouldn't care about what utility the ant has, but because of the its intrinsic value, uh, we should able to conserve the species, species population or the ecosystem. So it doesn't have to say give the some sort of services, ecological services or ecosystem services. So if it is there, then that has its own intrinsic value. So these are four normative postulates of conservation biology proposed by Sol. And he also said that this science is very different than other biological sciences. So, what he said was that there is a very core distinction of conservation biology. The first is the basis in preserving biodiversity, and it focuses on the study and preservation of biodiversity rather than management of individual species. Okay? So the focus of the conservation biology is proposed by soul was that it's focused on the study and preservation of biodiversity rather than the management of individual species. So conservation biology, according to Soul, and it still is a value-laden and value-driven. So who decide which species we need to conserve? So who told people to conserve rhino and not say barking deer or hog deer in Kaziranga? Okay, because there is the value-laden. So we put value to certain individuals. So it is committed to valuing biodiversity regardless of its utilitarian value. So it doesn't matter. So if the utilitarian value would have been important, the earthworm would have been the better species to preserve because they have the large ecosystem services they provide by mixing this soil. So this is a mission and advocacy oriented. So there is a the conservation biology is a mission driven. So it has a mission to say save certain species. So which is not the case in any other biological system. And this is a crisis oriented. So when there is a crisis of a certain species, for example, when there is a say decline in vulture population in India, when there is a decline in vulture population in India, then there was a very the conservation biologists sit together and they said, okay, now let's save this species. So regardless of whether there is a knowledge, existing knowledge on the vulture or not, but now there is a crisis of this declining population and we must save this. Then conservation biology was integrative and multidisciplinary, as I already showed you in the previous slide, and they concerned with the evolutionary time. And conservation biology is very, very adaptive. So for adaptive means, so they put forward certain management practices, also conservation practices. If they fails, then they will learn from these mistakes and then they adapt the next strategy and try to do a second set of conservation say interference. So these are the few core distinctive distinctions that make conservation biology very, very different subject from the other biology. However, so so once the conservation biology was all these normative postulates, all these principles, all these logics were created, then there was a huge, say, impetus on creating protected areas, conserving species. However, in the last, so since this paper was published in 1987, uh, from there, the species population were population of different species were declining. So the extinctions of many species were still not being checked. So this gives rise to, then there are these two biologists, Peter Kareva and Michel Marvier, they challenged this. They said that the traditional conservation is not giving fruitful results. So we need a new kind of conservation, and they call this new conservation as the conservation science, contrary to what Soul postulates is, when they started this entire conservation biology discipline. So what is their the, the conservation science? What they say is contrary to the conservation biology, conservation sciences are more utilitarian values. So if you contrast it with the conservation biology, the conservation biology was more like a focusing on the intrinsic value of the ecosystem. So intrinsic value of the population, intrinsic value of the species. Conservation science start focusing on the humanitarian side. Okay? So they said that there are, contrary to, if you compare this to slides, this to figures, so it is very, very different. So conservation science are mostly talks about economics, agriculture, anthropology, communication, psychology, sociology, philanthropy, sustainable development, ethics, public policy, public health, and climate science, on in which the conservation biology is one part. So they said that all these are fine, conservation biology is fine, but this conservation biology should be viewed in a larger context, because since Soul proposed the conservation biology, many things have changed, and now we need a new kind of conservation uh, uh, mission, which not only talked about the biodiversity, but also take care of the aspirations of humans. So uh, basically, conservation biology is more, the conservation science is, these are the functional postulates. They say that pristine nature untouched by human influence doesn't exist. So this is partly true, because there was a very interesting book by uh, Emma Maris, who said in a book called The Rambunctious Garden, she said to she visited many wilderness places, and her intention was to find out the pristine nature. So pristine means completely undisturbed from the human footprints. And she found none. So the pristine nature, so pristine wilderness, untouched by human influence, doesn't exist. So the fate of nature and that of people are deeply intertwined. So uh, in conservation biology, Soul said that conservation biology is not about the humanitarian. So if it doesn't encompass the humanitarian issues in the conservation in that discipline. So contrary to Kareva in the Marvier, they said that the fate of nature and that of the people are deeply intertwined. So uh, so nature needs people, and people also need nature. So nature can be surprisingly resilient. So contrary to what Soul said, that we need to keep a balance, because if the system goes beyond that balance, then everything will fall apart. But what they said, that the nature can be surprisingly resilient. So they gave examples of many places where uh, once you withdraw the disturbance, or once you withdraw the cause that factors that cause the disturbance to the system, they immediately come into the previous system. So that's why that they said that it's a very risky. And human communities can avoid the tragedy of the commons. So all of you know that.
Sir, can I stop you for a second? I'm sorry for the
Yeah.
interruption. Uh, some of the participants are complaining that you're not, the voice is breaking.
Okay. So
Is
is it
is
better
there a
now?
problem with your network? Like your voice
Network
is
is fine here.
okay.
Yeah, I
Okay.
can hear you very clearly.
All right. Please go.
Sir,
Please continue.
I think it's your earphones. There is some issue with your earphones.
Is it?
Earphone is also okay. So can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Now we can hear.
you're audible, but sometimes
Okay,
your voice kind of
I
breaking
see.
up.
I see. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll come little closer.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, so the human communities can avoid the tragedy of the commons, and the flat world means the local conservation efforts are deeply connected to the global forces. So that means uh, the uh, what happened in, say, in one locality is affected by the global forces. For example, there's a very interesting paper by M. D. Madhusudan, and how the collapse in, say, coffee industry. Okay, coffee industry in Brazil had an impact on the biodiversity of Bandipur National Park, that is in South India. So if you have some, I'm not going to discuss that paper, so if you can just search this global delays for this coffee plantation, the collapse of the coffee plantation in Brazil has impacted the Bandipur National Park. So you will see that the connection, local connection. local resources are connected directly to the global. So, so there are some normative postulates also proposed. The conservation must occur within human-altered landscape. Contrary to what Sol said, that conservation should mostly focus on the undisturbed area where which are free from humans. They said that conservation now must focus on the human-altered landscape. And the conservation will be durable success only if people support conservation goal. So this is another postulate that was proposed by Kareba. They said that in order to be a durable success, or in order to conservation to be successful, we need people support. And this is one of the most controversial postulate that actually infuriates a lot of traditional conservation biologists, which say that conservationists not must work with corporations. So that means you can work with any, let's say, industry or any companies with a. So you can work with oil, or you can work with Coal India to protect, say, the infrastructure. It's like this. Okay. So I'm not taking any stand here, but this is what this conservationist, the new conservationist, said that they must work with the corporation. Only by seeking to jointly maximize conservation and economic objective is conservation likely to succeed. So they said that conservation would be successful only if it can link with the economic objectives. So otherwise, conservation is not going to be very sustainable. So, and finally, the conservation must not fringe on human rights and must embrace the principle of fairness and gender. This particular normative postulate was never discussed in traditional conservation, and it says that the human rights should also be part of conservation, and then it must embrace the principles of fairness and gender. So these are the five normative postulates that was proposed by the conservation uh, science. So in order to just give you an overview of these two disciplines, so there are three uh, distinguished by their views on the role of people-centered conservation. So that is related to the role that people should play in conservation. Then there is a science-led ecocentrism. That means it's related to the role of science in the conservation of the species and ecosystem, and the conservation through capitalism, relating to the role of corporation in market-based approaches in conservation. If you look at the traditional conservation, so this is one experiment that was done by a website called the futureconservation.org, where they ask the participant to select. They have to, the participant has to give answer to various questions. So the traditional conservationists, if you look at all these dots, are the places where there is equilibrium, and the traditional conservationists were less people-centered. And if you compare this with the new conservationists were more people-centered. And traditional conservationists were more in favor of science-led ecocentrism. Okay. Whereas there is almost agreement between new conservationists and the traditional conservationists in terms of say uh, that's the conservation should be the science-led ecocentrism. And the third one is very important again, where both of them disagree. So traditional conservationists were less in favor of conservation through capitalism. They said completely no to the capitalism. Whereas the new conservationists, they say that they are more in favor of conservation through capitalism. So these are the two very uh, interesting development in say biodiversity conservation. So these are the two approaches. I'm not talking about there are many other approaches of biodiversity conservation, but I'm just talking right now about the two traditional versus the new conservation. So, regardless of whether you are a new conservationist or a traditional conservationist, the conventional conservation is mostly focused on, say, hierarchy of priority. For example, so first priority of conservation should be to conserve the ecosystem because it supports all of the other categories of life within. So the uh, first priority is the ecosystem. And second, when the ecosystem breaks down, focus on restoring population of many different species and thereby slowly rebuilding the ecosystem. So if the ecosystem breaks down, then you should focus on restoring the population and then slowly rebuild the ecosystem. And the third is when a particular species is severely threatened, focus on reducing the threats it faces and finding out more about that species. So this is the third hierarchy. The fourth hierarchy is when a species is approaching extinction, try to save every individual and breed as many as possible, if necessary or possible in captivity. So, so if you look at the pygmy hog conservation program, this is somewhere here in the fourth one. So if you look at the say ecosystem, conserve the entire ecosystem, say for example Manas and all, so Manas would be the top. So, but all these are simultaneously going. In the final dire straits, keep genetic diversity intact so that there is at least a possibility of resurrecting that species through artificial reproduction in future. Because the genetic diversity, once the individual lost, when the species is lost, their genetic diversity or genetic makeup is also lost along with them. So, if possible, try to keep the genetic diversities so that in future there are some ways by which you can resurrect those species. This is the far cry so far. So these are the different hierarchy of say the conventional conservation that we talk about. Okay. But in none of this, except for the fourth one, try to save every individual. So we didn't find the conservation, traditional as well as the new conservation, focusing on the individual. So I'm not talking about the individual of species, but individual animals. Okay, so that comes under the realm of animal health. So then comes the very interesting new development in conservation. So there are certain people, certain biologists like Daniel Ram, Mark Bekoff, and the Arian Wallach. So all of them are from Australia. So they started something called the compassionate conservation. So here, unlike the traditional conservation or
Yes.
the new, yeah,
Are you showing a PowerPoint because it's just showing the first page?
yeah, I'm showing the PowerPoint. I'm here.
Are you, I mean, we're seeing only the first page. Are you sharing it?
Yeah, I'm sharing it.
Priyanshu, anybody else, can you see the pages? Or are you
Sir,
just seeing the first page?
so I thought you are showing the first page only, sir.
No, you're just showing the first page. It's not going in a PowerPoint mode.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Oh, I see. I see. Uh, I think I'm in
Maybe
the middle. I can.
you have to stop. You have to stop sharing, then go back
Okay.
and share again. And right? Yes. Now we can see
Yes.
it. Yep. Yep.
Can you see now?
Yes. And can you go in the presentation mode, please?
Okay.
It's not there yet. Just
Okay.
presentation mode. I mean, where we can just see the. If you go in a presentation mode, then we can only see the full page.
Oh, I see. I see. I see. I see.
So that
So
is the
can I?
button. You click on the button. But yep, click on that. Yes. Yeah, that button. Yeah, we can see it now. Now good. All good. Thank you.
All good. Okay.
Yes, because it was going above our head because we are not able to see it. So
No,
now,
I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. I thought like everybody was seeing this because
yeah,
they were.
nobody spoke up. So finally,
Oh, I see. I
sorry.
see. I see.
Okay, now we make sense because otherwise it's going above my head. Thank
I'm
you.
really sorry. I'm really sorry for
No,
this.
thank
I thought everybody is seeing this. Okay. So, so then, as I said, that Daniel Ramp, Mark Bekoff, and the Arian Wallets, they proposed something called the compassionate conservation. So, and they defined it as a rapidly growing international and cross-disciplinary movement that promotes the protection of wild animals as individuals within conservation practice and policy via a conservation ethics that prioritize the protection of other animals as individuals, not just a member of population of species, but valuing in their own right. So this is a kind of a statement that completely going against the traditional versus the new conservation ethics. So so there are this uh, ethical philosophy, and I'll talk about the tenets of the compassionate conservation. So it is an ethic that combines the number of well-explored philosophies that includes virtue ethics, that is undertaken in action because it is enabling to do so. That means you can do, say, conservation, or you can take an action without thinking about the consequences. Then deontology, which where you undertake an action because it is morally correct to do so, and then the consequentialism or utilitarianism, where there's equal regard for the interest of all individuals, irrespective of race, creed, sex, and species. So, in the consequentialism, before you undertake any action, you should be also say aware of the consequences of your action. The compassionate conservation takes the view that individual animals are as valuable as population or species from a conservation perspective. So as I already told you, the conservation biology and the conservation science mostly focuses on the species and above it. So species, population, communities, or ecosystems, whereas the compassionate biology, they're mostly focusing on the individual of a species. So there are these four tenets. So Wallach et al. In a very influential paper that appeared in 2018 in the Conservation Biology, she and her colleagues proposed four tenets of the compassionate conservation. The first tenet was do not do no harm. I'm just going to read this. First, do no harm, adapted from the core precept of medical bioethics council that instincts to intervene should be carefully scrutinized and selectively pursued. Given an existing problem, it may be better not to do something or to do nothing than to risk causing more harm than good. So, for example, if there are options to not do anything or do something and harm the animal, the compassionate conservation said that you do nothing. Then the second was the individual matters. Individuals matter. The principle that the lives of individuals matter acknowledge the intrinsic value of wildlife individuals and resist the tendency to reduce them or their value solely to their position as member of collectives. So distinctly categorize the population and the communities and the species as the wildlife collectives and individuals as the wildlife individuals. So here she and her colleagues, they said that individuals matters in conservation. Then inclusivity of individual animals. So this is again a very controversial tenet where uh, uh, they propose that inclusivity acknowledges the intrinsic value of all wildlife individuals and collectives, whether their population are large or small, whether their ancestors were introduced or native, whether they are considered sentient or not, and regardless of useful to humans. So some of these statements are very good, but there are certain statements, for example, whether their ancestors were introduced or native, that creates a huge uh, debate in conservation biology, particularly in Australia, where Australia is facing a serious threat from many say introduced or invasive species. The fourth one was the peaceful coexistence between human and animal. Finally, peaceful coexistence calls for recognition that the first instinct in conflict situations should be to critically examine and, in many cases, modify one's own practices rather than pursuing act of aggression against wildlife individuals. For example, if there is a human-wildlife conflict, then according to compassionate conservation, the first instinct should be to examine our own action rather than doing any harm to the say to the elephants. Okay, so these are the four different tenets
Excuse me,
of,
sir, excuse me.
Yeah.
Are you on slide number 15?
Yes, I'm on slide number 17.
Okay, sir, you're in the screen, we can just see 15.
Okay.
So I think first of all, you have to share your screen and click on share screen, not the PowerPoint window.
Just a minute. So what I'll do, I'll just go like this. Is this okay?
Okay, sir, now I can see 15, still 15.
Okay.
Okay, now 17, yeah, 17 I can see. 16 now.
17,
Yeah.
16 you can see, no?
Yes, sir.
17?
Yeah, 17 now I can see, sir.
Okay. So I think I just I discussed this 4 tenets of compassionate conservation, and I'll just skip to this one, and I'll talk about how this compassionate conservation they criticize the traditional conservation. So Wallace et al. So she gave a lot of examples from the literature, from the scientific literature, where she criticized the traditional conservation, how they dealt with the compassionate, dealt with the animals. For example, there is one very controversial decision that was taken by the Copenhagen Zoo of killing a young giraffe. So his name was Marius. So he was killed because he was. They thought that his gene pool, this particular individual, his gene pool was not contributing to the population. So that means that his gene pool was very common. So to the horror of many compassionate biology, so this individual was killed and it was dissected in front of a lot of spectators. Then the flesh of this individuals was fed to the lions of Copenhagen Zoo. So the Copenhagen Zoo actually defended this action and saying that so because this particular individual was not contributing to the gene pool, so and if they let it allow to breed, it will create the inbreeding among the population. So it's better to kill this, and then they thought they will just feed it to the lions in the zoo. Then many other agencies were actually said that don't kill it, so we'll purchase this animals and keep it somewhere. But for some strange reason, Copenhagen Zoo never replied to those communications, and this animal was killed, and these were fed. So here, this individual was sacrificed for the greater cause of the so-called keeping this genetic say pool undiluted. So second case Wallace et al. Proposed was the war on cats. So this was mostly in Australia. What happened there was the cats was introduced in Australia, and in no time their population expanded rapidly. So the population at one point of time were around 2 million. That means 20 lakhs cats were there in Australia. So all these cats were then eating on the native flora, native fauna, and as a result, a lot of this native fauna become their number become rapidly declined, and some of them even were on the verge of extinction. So they thought that they will kill this cat by using many lethal ways. So whereas, so I just wanted to tell you here that these kind of acts are not supported by the compassionate conservation, because they said that do no harm. So that's the first tenet. And third tenet, that the inclusivity. That means whether these are introduced or say introduced species or the native species, doesn't matter. All these introduced species have also the same intrinsic values. So that actually creates a lot of heated debate among traditional conservationists and the compassionate conservationists. But and she also proposed a few very successful examples of compassionate conservation. So there is this uh, very famous example of how dogs protect this little penguin. So this dogs protect the penguins from the red foxes. So in Australia, so there were this colony of the little penguin, and where the red foxes were going, and they were killing them, reducing their number to say around 20 or 30 individuals. Then some farmer he introduced this dog, and the dog used to protect these dens, and the red foxes then stopped predating on the little penguin. As a result, so all a dog, in fact, penguin and the red foxes, they coexist together. Then the second example given by Wallace et al. Was this very interesting experiment that was done in Kenya, where the beehive were placed, wherever there are huge human-animal conflict, or where the elephant used to come to the agricultural fields, they put these fences, and in between these fences, they put these beehives. So generally, elephants are always scared of bees, and whenever they come near these beehives and they set this, the bee will come out and they chase them. So, and what Wallace et al. Says that this is one of the very important ways by which the elephant can stay in the same landscape as without harming the humans, and locals can get benefit by procuring honey from this particular honeybees, beehives. But there are again huge critics of compassionate conservation. Uh, so Hayward in 2019 wrote a very scathing attack on this compassionate conservation, in periods of compassionate conservation. So the first was the do no harm, and where he said that food webs inextricably involved harm by one species to another, directly or indirectly, as all living things compete for the planet's finite resources. Whether conservationists let nature take its course or actively manage nature for biodiversity conservation, harm cannot be avoided given nature's interdependencies. So, what compassionate conservationists also said that you do not have to kill the species. So they propose that in order to say control the population of the cats, we need to introduce our top apex predators. So they said that people cannot kill those, but the animals can. So there, the compassionate conservation was little bit not on the same page as the traditional conservation. And individuals matter. There are clear evolutionary argument for species conservation, not for the individual conservation, and more generally biodiversity conservation, because in species extinction is the termination of a line of descent, and the value of communities and ecosystem is greater than the sum of their parts. So Hayward has said that individual doesn't matter. So what matters is the species. What matters is the population, because they if the population or the species become extinct, the entire genetic diversity also becomes extinct. Then the third is the inclusivity, and compassionate conservation appears to be directed at large and charismatic movements. This is a very valid point where if you see all the examples given by Wallace, so she proposed only the large charismatic mammalian species in defending the compassionate conservation because they thought that these large charismatic species will garner public support. But there are many species, say of say invertebrates, say reptiles, say amphibia or birds, or say species which are less charismatic. The compassionate conservation was not able to say too much about those species. So, but this is said, and some of them also said that this is though compassionate conservationists say that there's a large section of society that are slowly accepting the tenets of compassionate conservation. But again, people, particularly in African countries, they said that these are mostly the people who are elite class or who are not, say, represent the inclusive societies. And the coexistence, peaceful or otherwise, is not possible if one of the species goes extinct. So there is a very interesting example of this Tristan albatross. So there is a house mouse which was introduced in Raw Island in Australia, and this house mouse has completely eliminated this albatross. So there are instances where the house mouse used to eat the live albatross. So when asked about what to do about this, the compassionate biologist said that who are we to decide? Why play God to decide who lives in that island or not? So, which actually provoked one of the uh, proponent of the conservation biologists, Driscoll, who said that compassionate conservation is anything but not conservation, anything but conservation. So there were very scathing attack on this kind of conservation. So in conclusion, so what I think is that there are some merits, demerits of all these three approaches of conservation, and I think we should not forget that regardless of what approach you do, uh, the the main focus should be the biodiversity conservation, because the crisis of species extinction is real. Species are declining very rapidly. The extinction rate of species is almost 100 times the background rate. So background rate, extinction rate is the rate at which species naturally go extinct. So which is around one species getting lost in 1 million years. So that is the background extinction rate. But the extinction rate is far exceeded that one. So right now the extinction rate of species is 100 extinction per million species year. And in future, this extinction rate is going to be around 1,000 extinction per million species year. So that means that we are into the midst of, say, the sixth March extinction. And what I think that if we keep fighting about which approach is better, which approach is not, what we are losing is the sight of this biodiversity conservation. So at the end, I think the biodiversity would be the biggest loser if there is a constant fight among these three different approaches of conservation. But having said this, I just wanted to end by asking you: does the end justify the means? So this is whole contention is. So what kind of approaches one should adopt in order to do the biodiversity conservation? So personally, I think there should be some kind of synthesis of this three discipline and other approaches of biodiversity conservation, which I didn't talk in this talk, and to find out the uh, best say uh, uh, think from these three different approaches and then do the biodiversity conservation. Otherwise, if these three are keep fighting with each other and we are losing the sight of this biodiversity contribution, and the biggest victim will be the species as well. So with this, I'd like to thank Anajali for once again for giving me these opportunities. And I just wanted to stop here by saying that there are two things. Uh, I think what we can debate, we can discuss, uh, given all these three approaches and many other approaches, that whether I just wanted to provoke you, whether feeding dogs, whether feeding birds, whether feeding, say, sparrows, whether feeding monkeys is good or not. Second, all these rescue programs, are they actually helping conservation? Are they actually helping the species? To capture is, say, rescue an animal from one place and release it to another, whether this is actually helping the species. So let's discuss this question, discuss this interesting questions in the next session. So with this, once again, thank you so much. I stopped.
Thank you so much, Narayan sir, for for throwing light to this fairly new concepts and very interesting concepts indeed. And with this, I would like to welcome the audience to unmute themselves and ask their questions, and if they can, to answer your questions as well.
So I'm really sorry for the technical glitch. I thought I'm just all are seeing the slides. But unfortunately, there is some hidden problem.
Please, if you have any questions, please unmute yourself.
I would like to know what is going on in Northeast area. What kind of like you know some of the stuff went above my head. I have to be honest, but I wanted to know what kind of what kind of method is used for Northeast so
I
far.
think Northeast, I think mixture of three of them. Okay, but less of a conservation science. So it's but more like it's all this declaration, all these areas in the protected areas. I think it's a typical conservation biology approach. Um, so if people are working there, for example, there are many tea states in Assam which are working with the conservationists to stop this elephant. So they are making their tea gardens more elephant friendly. I think this is a very useful thing, and that is a part of a conservation science. So, and also the compassionate biology, for example, there are many people who are working. For example, WTI, they have a rescue center. They are rescuing individuals from the Kaziranga, and I think that is part of this compassionate biology, compassionate conservation. So I think still the traditional conservation, the conservation biology is still like sharing the lines here, but I think other uh, others are also uh, catching up.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Linda,
Hello,
does that answer your question?
Yes. Is he still
Okay.
there? I am not able to hear.
sir. Are you
Yes,
there?
he's
Yeah,
there.
yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
Let me just start my video, if possible, and I can see people.
So there's some connectivity issue in your side, so we had to turn off
Uh,
your video.
okay.
Okay.
All right. So, are there any more questions from the audience?
Uh, yeah. So, they, among that, like quite often they do for fish. Is that
Hmm.
also come under wildlife? Because I remember in the U.S. I think somebody took carp, common carp or something like that, and carp had taken over, I think.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
so you know what is the condition in Assam now for fish point of view? I mean, we used to have so many different kind of fish, right? Now, why everybody's saying that there's no fish in Brahmaputra? You
Hmm.
know, and I get surprised. We have such a big river. Why, why don't we have fish? Why do we have to get fish from outside?
Yeah.
It
So I
is
think,
that
yeah. So I think one issue that is very very important is, though I do not subscribe to what the compassionate conservation says, that you should not bother about the introduced species. For example, if you know that there is a Thai magur in Assam, so Thai
okay?
magur is an aggressive carnivore, so it will not allow any other fish to survive, so or flourish. So it will just not allow other species to grow. I think if you release this high magur in the wetlands and in the gills in other water bodies, I think it will definitely have a serious impact on the say freshwater ecosystem. So I'm completely against of like introducing species, and what compassionate biology are saying that do nothing. So you cannot do anything about it, because now, so it's just like some politicians said that, okay, I change your name to from this to that. So what they are saying, that just declare all the say introduced species as native, then your problem is solved. It is not solved, because this species doesn't belong here. But and this native species is a result of an evolutionary time scale. So these are not like a product of say few hundred, few decades or 100 years. These are co-adapted and co-evolved for a longer time. I think we need to respect that say uh, that evolutionary history of a species and the place. And if you introduce this species, that they will definitely have implication. And regarding the loss of fish diversity, and you raise a very very valid question, because in unlike US, where there is a department called US Fish and Wildlife Services, we don't have fishes. Fishes is a part of, say, fishery department or agriculture department. So this still is not into the, say, wildlife one. But definitely, slowly, I think the first thing is that people in Northeast we still discovering new fish species. So there is one faculty in Manipur University who has, I think, discovered almost I think close to 200 new fish species from northeast India. So we are still finding fish species from the streams and rivers of northeast. It's extremely rich, and we do not know how these species are going extinct. And partly it's because in most of this river, the traditional way of fishing has been replaced by some very sustainable way. They use pesticides where there's hundreds of fishes. Because I have seen that in Kundilkalia, that's in remote Sadia. So they use pesticides to kill fishes, and they pour the pesticides upstream. So they will go to Arunachal and they will put say this pesticides, and downstream then they collect fish. So the way of fish, how the people collect fish earlier and now I think this is changing, but it's still I can tell you that the demand for fish in Assam is much higher, and we are not able to explore why we are not say giving or not promoting fisheries in Assam, because there's a huge potential of fishery in Assam, but we are importing fishes from Hyderabad and other areas. So I think we need to, I think government should promote fishery and really invest in this sector in order to say make Assam self-sufficient in fish.
And also, as for the other animals, golden langur and all others, as a civilian, what could we
Yes.
do? What do you suggest that we should do to preserve our, you know, natural habitat? What should we do?
Yeah. So I think the first and foremost thing that whatever remaining area we have, whatever remaining forest, whatever remaining wetland, whatever remaining grassland we have, I think we should be very, very vocal to protect this, because this is the last remnants. So if these are lost, then I think we are just like sitting on the edge. Maybe from next decades, I think we start seeing the local extinction of these species. Take for example the golden langur, right? So the entire golden langur habitat is now fragmented. So golden langurs are not found in a say, contiguous forest, except for Manas and the say Royal Bhutan National Park. So if you look at other areas, these are the very very fragmented populations. So what we need is to so maybe in most of the cases it's not possible to connect these fragments, but if wherever there is a possibility, I think we need to connect these fragments and the and the restore the degraded one. So restoration is the key. So first of all, whatever forest we have, we need to protect it. So I think this forest should get priority. And second is that whatever forest we have, and if these are degraded, we need to revive it. We need to regenerate it. So I think this is the way forward, because uh, catching them and bringing them in captivity and increasing their number is right now I think it's not a, if you remember that hierarchy that I talked about you, so it's still not reached at that level, but I think there is a potential of say because we still have a forest left, but these forests are not in a good shape. So we need to revive this forest so that the population can survive longer. And if wherever possible, we need to connect this uh, fragmented habitats. And this is true for a lot of other species as well. So because large animals cannot survive in small forest. So that's for sure. Okay. So, for example, if the area of an entire park is around say, 20 square kilometer, so it's a very difficult for that park to say support the population of say elephant, population of say tiger or leopard can survive. But there are large animals which cannot be survived in those. And if you look at because I worked in Upper Assam and I have a little bit experience about Upper Assam, so I have seen that the forest is there, but this forest is extremely degraded forest. So I think we need to. There is a very very important science which is called the restoration science. So it's not just by going and planting trees. No, it's not. It's a restoring the entire ecosystem. So it's a restoring the entire ecological processes. So if you can do this, I think we will be able to uh, protect the species from going extinct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melinda, for your questions. Also, thank you, Narayan sir, for joining us today. It was certainly wonderful. And to all the participants, thank you for joining. See you.
Thank you.